So the New York Times did a list called the 100 Best Books of the 20th Century, which is obviously hyperbole, but people took it very personally, and I understand that this cannot be the definitive list of 100 best books ever. More accurately, it would probably be the 100 pretty enjoyable books that 500 writers, novelists, critics, and elite people who are in with the New York Times could viably agree on. When it comes to best books lists, I truly think that too many cooks absolutely F up the broth. And I even think with like literary prizes, 5 judges is like the maximum that I could even imagine it being. Reason being that literature is incredibly personal, and even if you try to be objective, I do think it's really hard to be so. And particularly I think for books, because books take a really long time to read. If you were a film person, you could watch like 10 films in a day easily. Well, maybe, I don't know, it depends how long you stay up for, but it's not really possible to read more than 1 book a day. And realistically, most people, even if they really love books, might read 1 or 2 a week. So an objective overview of a literary landscape becomes kind of impossible for 1 or 2 or even 10 people to make a consensus on. On the website, they have a function that generates a graphic that shows you like the books that you've read out of this list. I got 17, which I'm not like that. I'm actually surprised. I thought it would be less than that. I tend to not have read a lot of the books that you should read list, even though I have read a lot of books. I've worked in publishing for a long time, and I feel like I know a lot of the books, even if I haven't read them. However, what is interesting about my 17 books is that of all of those books, I can honestly say that I would have put 4 or maybe 5 of them on any best books list. And in some cases, I think that they're the right author, but maybe not their best book. For example, Mohsin Hamid. I've read almost all of his books, and Exit West isn't the best one. In my humble opinion, the same for Jeffrey Eugenides, Kazuo Ishiguro, Ali Smith. To me, in my personal opinion, these aren't their best books, so it's surprising to see them on the list. And it got me thinking about how maybe unuseful democratic lists of books are, and how much I value personal recommendations from a specific person, because I know the lore around them a little bit and I can judge their tastes a little bit better, so I know what their endorsement means to me. So I thought it has been a while since I've done a book video, and it got me thinking about the premise of this list, which is the best books of the 21st century. Now, the 21st century has been going on for a while. It's been 24 years. However, I've realised that a lot of the books that I love were actually written in the 90s or before. So thinking about modern books that I love has been really interesting. So I thought I would make a list for you of the best books of the 21st century according to me. But instead of making 100 books, which would take forever, and instead of picking just 10, which I found completely impossible, I've decided to pick 1 book from each year of the 21st century so far that I think not only is like personally a favourite for me, but also has like a kind of clarity that I think will probably last the rest of the century. Like if people read these and they become beloved, I think they have the qualities in them to speak of their time and also to like speak to other generations and really last. Like I think they could be what the title insinuates, which is the best books of the 21st century. I think that people will or should still be talking about these books by the time we near the end of the 21st century. Do you see what I mean? So there's books that you might not see on this list, and it's not that they're not my personal favourites and I don't love them, but just that they don't have those qualities about them as well. So I thought this was a really cool opportunity to talk to you about some books that I might not have talked about on the channel ever or before, and also look at some gaps in my own knowledge about periods even within my lifetime where I didn't really read that many books from that era. And I think that it's interesting being online and being a public book reviewer, because you're so encouraged to read the books that are about to come out or are coming out currently. And it means that a lot of my reading list at the moment, for probably the past like 5-6 years, has been completely saturated with books that are all being published like right now. And it means that I don't get much of a chance to go back and like read stuff that might have been forgotten or ignored by me in the last 2 decades. So let's go through every year of the 21st century so far, and I will tell you the one book that was published that year that I think is worth your time. The year is 2000. I am 10 years old and still wearing Pocahontas leggings, but on the other side of the world, Stephen King is publishing on writing. Now, I am not a Stephen King fan. I haven't read any of his fiction books, but I have read this book at least 3 times, and it is one that is cited by loads of different writers who I would never have expected to cite this book specifically. And for that reason, I think it talks to lots of different genres of writing. I also think it's so well written and so interesting and well paced that it also is just interesting for people who aren't planning on writing a book, but are more interested in like how the sausage is made, like how is a book like it created, and if you love books, it is really interesting. And I think this one's also noticeable because it talks not only a little bit about memoir and his experience with his life and how he thinks that has impacted his writing, but also about how a sentence is constructed. A lot of books about how to write books are all about plotting and character, and while that is in the book, he's also just about the formal discipline of how to make a good sentence or a good paragraph. And for that reason, I think it's going to last forever. 2001, not much to be said here. Atonement by Ian McEwan. I'm not the only person who thinks that's an incredible book, but it is one that I've read several times, and it has stood up through all of my different tastes and moody criticisms and periods where I'm very fussy about what I've read. Whenever I've read that book, I'm still like, yeah, it slaps. The Lovely Bones by Alice Sebold. What's interesting about this decade in general is that I think I was 12 when this came out. I think I must have read it when I was 14 or 15. And I wasn't reading very many books, honestly, at all during that period. I was a really big reader when I was a kid. But when I was a teenager, I was mainly, at drama classes. And when I was reading, I was honestly just reading the Bible. But that's a story for another day. So I didn't read very many books during this period, and the fact that I even picked up this book and was willing to sit down with it and read it is a testament to how good it is. 2003, The Housekeeper and the Professor. Oh my God, I love this book. I didn't read it in 2003. I read it because it was reissued by the publishing house that I actually worked at the time, so I read it then. But it's just one of the most moving, incredible books ever. The premise is that there is a mathematician who has dementia and is forgetting a lot of things, but remembers the beauty and the structure of numbers. He's really, really hard to deal with. Most people hate working with him or looking after him, but there is this housekeeper and her small son who develop this incredible bond with him, and the professor starts teaching the little kid about the importance of numbers. It's an absolute masterpiece. I really think it's incredible, and it's translated from Japanese. So if you're interested in translations, it's also a good one for that. Hope in the Dark by Rebecca Solnit is my 2004 pick. This is a collection of essays / manifesto about the resilience of kindness and humanity in the face of disasters and how that has been misrepresented and misreported in the media. Rebecca Solnit is amazing. It's incredibly written and researched, and it's also really short and concise, so it wins for me. 2005, it's got to be The Book Thief. I love that book. I've read it several times. I also really love the film adaptation, and if you want a one-line sell for this book, it is written from the point of view of the character Death, and he pulls it off. I don't know how, but he does. The Elegance of the Hedgehog is my 2006 pick. This is a book about a small, again, like I think I really like books where it's like an elderly person who struggles to relate to the world around them befriends a small child who also struggles to relate to the world around them, and they have like an incredibly pure, lovely connection that changes both of their lives. I think that's the trope that I like. Screw enemies to lovers. I don't care. That's the tropes that I want. So this is one of those. It's translated from French, and it's set in a big old French apartment building where the woman who is charged with like running the building is a recluse, and there is a incredibly depressed teenager, I think she might be like 10 or 12, who lives on the top floor and is kind of isolated by her own privilege and riches and doesn't get on with her family. It's kind of like elite French aristocrat Matilda vibes. It's an incredible book. 2007 brought us The Reluctant Fundamentalist, which I think is Mohsin Hamid's best book. He was on the list for Exit West, but I personally think that this one is the best one, and you should read it. It's incredible. 2008 brought us The Host by Stephanie Meyer, and don't you dare dismiss this book just because you might not have liked Twilight. This book is better than the whole Twilight series put together. It's better than most other commercial sci-fi and futuristic stuff that I've read. And if you haven't seen the film adaptation with Saoirse Ronan, then you haven't been spoiled about the plot. I'll leave it to you. But if you like incredibly unpredictable plots, strange love triangles, and stories about communities that join and hide underground together to resist the horrible things that are happening outside and like more of a collective group narrative, then you will love The Host. Don't dismiss it. The only person you're failing is yourself. 2009 was a year where I really struggled to find a book for it. It's actually the only year that I really struggled with. In the end, I've come upon Catching Fire by Suzanne Collins because I love that series, but preferably I would have had The Hunger Games if I was going to pick the best book by Suzanne Collins. And Catching Fire is also really brilliant, but it feels weird to put the second book in a series on this list, so I'm uncomfortable with that. And I scrolled through a lot of books that were published in 2009, and I couldn't find any that I'd really either read or liked, so I don't know what I was doing that year. I mean, I was 19, so I was probably drunk somewhere. But if anybody has a really lovely favourite book that was published in 2009, let me know, because I would like to plug the gap in my knowledge. 2010 brought us Room by Emma Donoghue. Emma Donoghue's an incredible writer. Every single book she writes is very, very different in tone. But the premise of Room is it's told from a child's perspective, and the child is the son of a girl who was a teenager when she was abducted by a man and locked in a shed, and then he has now been living in that shed his whole life, and he's never been outside of the shed, of the room, which is an incredible thing to try and pull off, and I can't believe that she did. And then I can't believe they also made an amazing film adaptation of it as well. It doesn't make sense, but I like that it's there. Future Lena here to rectify my sins of forgetting 2011 when I was recording that video. So here I am in the future. 80 by Roxane Gay is one of the best short story collections I have ever read. It follows various different characters but still feels really coherent, and all of the characters are experiencing some form of the Haitian diaspora experience, whether that is migrating to other places or staying where they are and facing what they have to face in all these different eras in Haiti. For me, it's unusual because every single story is a banger. There aren't any freeloaders in there, which is hard to find with story collections, and also just the fact that just tonally it feels really cohesive. So that's why it's one of the best short story collections I've ever read. Now on to 2012. Tiny Beautiful Things. One of the best advice columns turned essay collection I have ever read. The audiobook is also incredible if you're interested, but it's just one of the most healing and well executed self-help genre books. I'm going to say here as well, I think that there were lots of different genres lacking in that New York Times list, and one of the genres that was lacking was self-help, which is a genre that I am currently writing in or have written in. My book is being published in January, and it's kind of, I'm calling it slapdash self-help, and it's very tongue-in-cheek, but I've always loved that genre, and I think it has a silly name. But it startles me that people don't understand how hard it is to pull off good books in that genre and how there are loads of talented writers on that shelf. It's just that they're not acclaimed in the same way like a traditional essayist might be. But anyway, Tiny Beautiful Things is a work of art, and it's one of my cornerstones of writing where I'm like, one day I might, possibly when I'm 80, finally be able to write as well as Cheryl Strayed. Another thing that was lacking on that list was poetry. So 2013's pick is Brand New Ancients by Kay Tempest. They are the most influential poet when it comes to my writing for me, and Brand New Ancients is it's kind of like a sweeping overview of lots of people's modern lives and how they are kind of the Greek gods of our time. They're as flawed as the Greek gods, they're struggling with the same kind of things, and it's such an incredibly powerful little book about our perspective on time and pain, and it's so good. Another one, I'm going through all of the forgotten genres now. Another genre that was completely forgotten by the New York Times list was children's. It's really hard to write a good children's book, and I think we should recognise when it has been done well. So The Murderer's Ape is a book translated from Swedish, which there is a fly really violently dying over there, and I don't think that I can intervene. But wow, nature is really taking its course. That spider is... Oh. Here's the thing about this book. It is about an ape that travels the world. And if that sounds silly to you, then you're about to miss out on one of the best books you'll ever read. I don't know how to tell you this, but Sally Jones the Ape will change your life. And no notes. Can't believe he's only written 2 or 3 books in this series. I need more from this man. Jakob, pull your finger out. We need more Sally Jones in our life. But this is the book that I don't even... It's so weird to me that it's kept to the children's section, because it's just like a universally very good book and we should all be reading it. Another self-help book that is one of the cornerstones of what I think is like quality, good, this is what the genre can do self-help, which is Sarah Knight's The Life-Changing Magic of Not Giving a Fuck, which I raved about a long time ago when the book came out on this channel, which I now realise is like 9 years ago. So I might not have talked about this book in a while. It's essentially a very funny, brash pep talk that I think really defrags your brain from all of its complicated overthinking, and just it like knows what discipline and what genre it's in, but it kind of also takes the piss out of itself. And I loved all of her books. I've read them all, but I think that this is the OG. It came out in 2015, and the fruits of me reading this book is probably the videos that I've made since. So if you want an advert for why it would be good to stop giving as much of a fuck, then this is it, this channel. That could be good or bad, depending. We hope it's good. The next one is 2016 Black and British. Again, I talked a lot about this book when I first read it, but that is now probably going on 5 or 6 years. So if you don't know, Black and British, A Forgotten History, I want to say is one of the best, if not the best, commercial history books ever, in my opinion. It's so well executed. It is very, very long, but it's written in these kind of segments and little vignettes that don't necessitate you knowing all of the context for each part of that history, but give you that history as you're reading it. Like, you don't even realize that you're receiving all of the history, but you are. And you can listen to it kind of like little podcasts, because they're all very dramatic and episodic. The way he tells the stories is so interesting and immersive. And of course, it's also covering a lot of really undertaught history for British people about how long Black people have been living in the UK, which is, spoiler alert, almost as long as white people. 2017 brought us Wedding Toasts I'll Never Give, which is one of the best written essay collections I've ever read. It is all about the intricacies and pitfalls and beauty of marriage and the realities of continuing a relationship long term. And everybody I've ever given it to has loved it. I think it's quite a good tongue-in-cheek wedding present or engagement present, but it is also really hopeful. It's not just like a doom and gloom, marriage is bad book, but it's just a banger. It's one of the best. 2018. The Overstory by Richard Powers, obviously. Loads of really good books were published in that year that sadly didn't make the list because there was no competition. The Overstory is 7 books in one book that all link together, all about different people's encounters with trees, which sounds weird, but it's actually the most engaging, far-reaching, I can't believe one human person thought this up and pulled it off kind of book, and it will also radicalise you in the best way ever. So, The Overstory. And also, he knows how to write a sentence. How is he that good at plotting? And also the minutiae of sentences. It doesn't make sense. That man is a genius. We continue. 2019 is also a year that had a lot of competition in it. I was reading a lot in 2019 and I read a lot of new books. However, I would be doing the planet a disservice if I didn't let Midnight Chicken and Other Recipes Worth Living For be the 2019 book pick. Again, we didn't see any recipe books on this New York Times list, did we? And that's probably because most recipe books are literally recipe books, just with recipes in. However, Ella Risbridger saw the genre of cookery, was like, what if we write this like it's a literary memoir, and there are some recipes in it, but the recipes themselves are so well written that they just read like really good prose. And if you're somebody who's incredibly busy and is probably never going to admittedly get round to cooking many of the recipes, but just wants a good time imagining and thinking about food, but also accidentally thinking about death and life and grief and hope, Waterfree wrote a book for them, and she did it. And it's incredible, and I just sit down with it like it's a novel, because that's how well written it is. Read the book. Unfortunately, I can't have any midnight chicken anymore because I've read too many books about veganism, but I think a lot of the recipes can be adapted, and honestly, the whole point of the book for me is not to cook the recipes, it's to enjoy the prose. So thank goodness, words are vegan. 2020, a confusing year for all of us, so I had to pick Outraged, Why Everyone is Shouting and No One is Listening, by Ashley Dotty Charles, who is a radio presenter here in the UK and has some really interesting things to say, not only about race online and the performance of our relationship to it, but also just about generally being angry on the internet and how productive and how unintuitive it is. It's so good. She goes in so hard. She even interviews Katie Hopkins in it, which I think was an incredibly patient and interesting choice. But I think there's not a lot like this book. And if you liked You've Been Publicly Shamed by Jon Ronson, I think that this is at the same level, in the same calibre, and I think it should be as famous as that book. But it's not. Make it make sense. Why? A new addition to my faves of all time list that I've never talked about on this channel before is Girly Drinks. This is a book that I read at the very beginning of this year. It was published in 2021, and I am frankly a little bit pissed that I hadn't heard about it before this year. Like, where was the hype? Where was the hype, guys? Where was the shouting? Why didn't I hear about this? This is a book, this is the history of women and alcohol throughout history, and I cannot believe that I didn't know any of this. Not only about how alcohol is made, but also about the feminist history of the brewing of alcohol, the even origins of the idea of a pub is actually like women's kitchens. The fact that most of the time throughout most of history, there were actually two professions that women could do to make their own living. One was sex work and the other was making alcohol and brewing it. And it actually became like the reason that it's been outlawed in loads of different cultures and times in history is because it's like a way of controlling women's income. Just read the book. 2022, again, was a sweaty year for me having to choose one book to represent this whole year, because I read a lot that year. But in the end, I think I landed on Glory, which was shortlisted for the Women's Prize, because execution-wise, it's an incredible feat to have done, to have completed, to have even thought up. It not only tells you about a period of Zimbabwean history that is so incredibly hard for anyone to talk or think about, but in a way that invites you in and makes you feel like you are capable of comprehending all the stuff that happened during that period. The way she ties this book up in a way that is so nuanced and like refusing to be neat and tidy and honest, and it's told from those different perspectives. Yes, it is told from the perspective of animals, but it is not Animal Farm. Not every book that is written about animals from a political perspective is a George Orwell ripoff. This is very original, and it's from a very long tradition in, I think, maybe almost every culture where we anthropomorphize animals. I refuse to have it skipped over. I think it is probably going to be one of the books of the century. And then finally, a book that I very recently finished is Doppelgänger by Naomi Klein. Why was this my first Naomi Klein book I've ever read, given who I am and what I talk about and what I think about all the time? I don't know. Maybe just self-harm. I don't know why I was depriving myself of Naomi Klein, but I read Doppelgänger because it won the Women's Non-Fiction Prize this year, and since it was the first year that this prize is happening, I was like, this is my chance to be that bitch who has read every single winner of a prize. And because this prize is starting this year, I could start now and I could do that every year forever, and then when I'm 65 I can be really freaking smug. So anyway, while my motives were selfish for reading this book, I just think it covered so many more bases than I was expecting. It's not only about right-wing politics and how people in our lives get radicalized on the internet, but also just about like, it talks a lot about Palestine and Israel and her experience as a Jewish person growing up in Canada, and how we think about ourselves, how we multiply ourselves for different situations, how we accidentally brand ourselves, and what does that mean when somebody tries to take our brand from us. I can't believe it covered so much, and I can't believe how well written it was, and I can't believe it, but I also can, because I've heard this woman speak. She's a genius. You'll notice that I haven't picked a book for 2024, and that's because I'm still reading. I'm still thinking about it. I'll update you soon. I think reading by year, or going through all of your favorites and seeing where the gaps are in your like publishing reading history, like when things actually came out, I think that's a really interesting way to think about your TBR and making sure you're not just focusing on all of the new stuff. Because I also think it's so interesting to read a book from the perspective of the future. So like reading a book that was published in 2000 when I was 10, before widespread internet access and Trump and COVID and the Two Towers, like that's all super interesting. And I think I should start reading more that was published even before I was born, because I kind of go straight to the classics, which leaves out like hundreds of years. So let me know. And if you were somebody who was reading in the noughties a lot more, tell me what I've missed from that decade where apparently I was just picking my nose and reading the Bible, and also anything from before I was born as well. The 90s, the 80s, the 70s. Hands up how many books I've read from those eras? Probably not that much. I would like to see these comments absolutely riddled with recommendations of books that you would have put on this list. Thank you so much for watching. This video was made possible by the Gumption Club, who tip me per video to make sure these videos keep happening. And I have written a book that is coming out in December, and if you would like to pre-order it, there is still time to win a woolly hat and come to my live stream that is only going to be available for people who pre-order before the 30th of July. So if you want to do that and you'd like to support my very weird, hopeful, practical approach to self-help, then Half-Assed Human might be for you. I'll leave the links below on how you do that. Thank you so much for watching. Frog Snog out.